And as the period joins me in the studio to help us make sense of what financial literacy in fact is and how it impacts families and society at large. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Indeed, good morning. First of all, help us appreciate what in fact financial literacy is. There's a mother watching and she wants to understand this definition and the impact it has on today's economy.
Okay, so financial literacy is being educated on managing one's personal finances. I know I'm using the word finance as well. So it's managing the money that flows into and out of your life. And this is with the purpose of wealth creation. Yes.
How does that impact largely the economy of the country?
Okay, so the economy of the country is made up of individual players, which are you and I. So the decisions that we make at a household level will inevitably affect the larger picture, which is the macro picture of how things operate in this particular nation. So in terms of how it affects the nation, one, low levels of financial literacy are likely to affect how people choose to borrow and spend money. Two, another discussion which is coming up as maybe life expectancy continues to increase is the issue of people who do not plan for their retirement. And as a result, it puts a lot of pressure on our social structures because you find a lot of the elderly would then have to be accommodated in the government social structures, such as the money which is given for the elderly. But if you have a situation where people plan for issues such as retirement, you put less pressure on the social structures. And that's why it is very important for people to be educated at a household level.
I mean, I like the fact that you have outlined how essentially, social structures can be strained as a consequence of people not having adequate knowledge about financial literacy.
Indeed.
And, savings and investment decisions, for instance. Speak to us also about in what ways does low financial literacy, if you like, contribute to debt accumulation and financial crisis, even at the individual level?
So the thing is that a lot of people do not understand the ratios that come into play when choosing when to borrow. So there are several aspects involved in debt. So first off, debt in and of itself is not bad. Debt can be good or bad depending on how you use it. But most people do not understand when to use debt, which are the essential things to use debt for and not to use debt for luxury. So that's one of the ways in which low levels of financial literacy affect people in terms of managing debt, because you perhaps find yourself borrowing for consumption, which is never advisable because you've already consumed that particular money, but then you find yourself paying off interest on, let's say, something of luxury, like maybe a new suit or maybe throwing a wedding. So low levels of financial literacy will have people engaging in debt, which they're not supposed to engage in. The second thing is, which is a really sad situation I'm starting to see on the rise in this country, is the issue of people not understanding the ratios of their debt to equity. So to put it simply, debt is everything that you owe, and equity is what you own, or perhaps your ability to pay off that particular financial obligation during that period. So you find that somebody has accumulated debt way above what they're able to pay. To put it simply, your debt to equity ratio should not be above 40%. This means you should not be paying off more than 40% of your salary in loans. But you find that someone's salary really is in the red because they've been borrowing from so many different people. The other thing that people don't understand is reading the fine print when it comes to understanding issues of interest and how it is accumulated and those kind of things. So not understanding financial literacy and how to acquire and use debt will put people in a really strenuous situation. So when it comes to building wealth, having bad debt is like being in a hole and you're trying to climb a tree that's above ground. So until you find yourself coming out of that hole, you never really be able to get out of debt. So debt in and of itself is not bad, but lack of financial literacy has people acquiring debt that they A, do not understand, B, do not need, and C, that they cannot afford.
I mean, you have spoken very well, and we see this happen on a daily basis where suicide cases are on the rise, and you also get stories that such and such committed suicide on account of what they were owing. Given that one is already, overburdened with debt, how do they then begin to navigate out of that situation? What insights can you give?
Okay, so to go back to our analogy of debt being a hole, right? So supposing this is ground level is where you don't have debt. Then imagine that there's a tree of wealth you need to climb. So before you get back to ground level, you need to get out of the hole. And if you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you need to do is stop digging. Sometimes we find a practice where people borrow money from one person, and because they cannot pay, they borrow more to pay that person, and as a result they continue to get into more and more debt. The second thing that you need to do if you find yourself in debt that you're failing to pay is have conversations with the people that you owe. It agitates people further if you choose to avoid their phone calls. The law may get involved. So it's best that you have the conversations with people to say, I'm in this amount of debt. I cannot pay you all this money at this point, but perhaps we can restructure this debt in such a way that I can pay over a long period of time. The other thing which is important is to manage your own perspectives about yourself. This means that you need to be comfortable with people viewing you as having reduced a lifestyle, because most people fail to get out of debt because they don't want to drive a smaller car. They don't want to move to a more affordable neighborhood. And that is why you have to manage your self-image and say that I'm still an important person. I'm still valuable to society, even though I have a lot of debt. And even if I've got into a situation where I have to reduce my lifestyle or perhaps take my children out of private school, I will still be able to get back. But now I just have to tighten up and not try to keep up appearances or keep up with the Jonesies.
The other issue, I mean, as Ebli explained, is the fact that you're in employment and you find yourself, of course, contracting debts, as it were. And you have given, I think, very useful insights as to how you can dig yourself out of that hole. Let's now speak about the challenges that debt contraction can actually have even on a child. I think in our earlier report, there was mention of the fact that there is mental health stress that can come about as a consequence of debt, and the children too get affected. To what extent do children get affected?
So the financial instability of a home affects children in that it affects maybe the kind of life that you're able to give them. In instances of situations of emergencies and even healthcare, you find yourself unable to even pay for hospital bills for children. And then issues of also nutrition, you may not be able to afford the kind of food that your children may need in that particular instance. It also affects children in that in situations where there's financial lack in a household, you have parents arguing, and then children get to see those things and it affects how they grow. You grow up with that anxiety, what are my parents always arguing about? And the other issue is that you find children being even kicked out of schools because their parents have not paid those financial obligations. And you find that it affects a child's self-esteem if every time that the school accountant comes, it's their name that's being called out to say, so and so come out of class because your parents have not paid your school fees. So it affects children if they're growing up in a household which is unstable.
I imagine that narrative is quite relatable, I think, in our instance. But finally, how does it then impact people's ability to plan for retirement or emergencies? Or conversely speaking, how can people, in fact, plan better for retirement or emergencies?
Okay, so every time you have your salary, don't spend everything that you earn. Leave a little something for emergencies. Number 2, have a plan for your short-term goals as well as your long-term goals. Short-term goals could be what you desire to do with your money in the next, let's say, 3 to 6 months. And then long-term goals, you're planning over a year plus. So then when it comes to retirement planning should be focused on passive income. Passive income is income that you're not actively working to earn. For instance, if you're renting out a house, if you're hiring out equipment, or if you're receiving, let's say, dividends from shares that you own, and if you're receiving coupons from government bonds, retirement planning should be passive income. The other thing I would encourage people to do is that we have a large informal sector in the country, and those markets are largely underserved by the formal pension schemes. What people don't realize, if you're listening to this show and you're out there, is that even though you are informally employed or you're a marketeer, there's the option for you to be able to start making contributions to the national pension schemes, such as NAPSA. And there are also private pension schemes which are available. And people shy away from these options due to lack of financial literacy, policy because they assume that they'll fix a number for you and say you must pay this much even though your income is low. There are ratios and calculations which they'll make and say perhaps this person is only making 2,000 kwacha. We'll ask them to pay a pension of so much.
Esther Perry, I would like to thank you ever so much for your appearance and your insights.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great.